We are dominated today, though, by Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary's announcement of a raft of tough new measures we're supposedly hearing to tackle illegal migration. Those who just tuned in and have been blissfully unaware of the news in the last few days, you lucky things, we are looking at things like fast-track deportation, so a limited number of appeals. You can't just keep on appealing for years and years on end. Will they be able to get that past the human rights lawyers and the Labour backbenchers? That's the question. Refugee status only temporary. It's going to be reviewed every 2.5 years. So that's it, unless you're making a contribution, you're going to have to go. Assumes they're actually going to be able to get those people out, and indeed they've got the people to carry out those reassessments. Judges told not to use Article 8 of the European Court of Human Rights, that's the right to private privacy and a family life, as an excuse to allow migrants to dodge deportations, but also crucially visa bans, Trump style we're told, visa bans for countries which don't accept their wrong-uns back, whether they're illegal migrants, whether people are overstayed, or whether they are their criminals. 3 African countries should be named so far: Angola, Namibia and the Democratic Republic of Congo. We've got 4,000 of their nationals that we don't want. They won't accept them back. But we are talking about very, very sort of slow steps to actually get to this point. Also talking about confiscating money and valuables from migrants who arrive here to pay for their accommodation, but not if they're family heirlooms. A lot of this is following what the Danish government has been doing. A left-wing government, interestingly, in Denmark, they've actually gone much further. They've got a ghetto law. Basically, if there are more than 50% of non-Western migrants living in an area, they can either demolish tower blocks or they can actually physically move people from living in those areas. Whether we actually see them going ahead with any of that is a big question. Whether any of that would actually work, another big question. Sam Armstrong, does any of that, even if it were all enacted, and that's a big if, will any of that actually make a difference to the pull factors of, it's Britain, you can work in the black market, and you might know some people who've got big communities of virtually every country in the world here, and basically they think that we are the land of milk and honey?
Look, I admire the chutzpah. I admire the salesman...
Of the illegal migrants or Shabana Mahmood?
Of a Labour government, and indeed a Home Office, because the civil servants, frankly, never change. It's the same people who were there before the election, who believe that they can pull one over the British public yet again. If you believe that this is going to make the blindest bit of difference, well, I've got a bridge to sell you. Look, these people believe that they could sell ice to the Eskimos, but at this point, everybody has worked out what is going on. Now, look, we've seen the fact that they say they're going to introduce Trump-style visa bans, only they're not Trump-style. They say they're going to seize jewellery, except if they say that they got it off, as I say, off the great Aunt Nellie, in which case it's exempt. They say we're going to send people home, yet they're not getting us out of the human rights framework, which means that people can appeal again and again and again, because Article 6, part of it that they're not even attempting to change, requires that they're able to do so. Until a politician, and frankly at this stage I don't care who, cuts the Gordian knot that is the UK's human rights framework and says, look, no, human rights do not apply, expressly do not apply to people who have broken into our country illegally, and we will send them wherever we choose at whatever stage we wish to, then nothing is going to work. And look, you wouldn't need to do it for very long, as Australia shows. You just need to draw a line in the sand and say anyone coming from this point forward is going to go home.
But also, crucially, I want the people who are already here out. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
But we can't do that at the minute, Julia, because we're getting overwhelmed. In terms of stopping the boats.
You need to stop, and then you can start working your way through. Right, well, I'd love to hear your thoughts. As I say, 0344 499 1000. Lots of texts and tweets. I will get to those, I promise, as well. But right now, let's talk to a man who knows. We often turn to Tony Smith, former head of the UK Border Force, just to simply go, will any of this actually make a difference? So I'll put that question to you, Tony. Afternoon to you. Will any of this make any difference?
Not really, Julia, I'm afraid.
I did not see that coming. I did not see that coming.
Sorry if I burst any bubbles here. But I mean, in my experience, and I've got a lot of it, in terms of reducing asylum intake, you've got to either stop them coming in the first place, so they can't get within the jurisdiction to claim asylum in the first place, or you've got to remove them quickly when they get here to send that message. And I don't think anything I've seen so far from these new announcements are going to do that. I mean, there are some things that might reduce the pull factor a little bit. If you're saying you can't bring your family here, you'll never get settlement for 20 years. Other aspects, I quite like the idea of sanctions, Julia, on I've always said, look, why are we letting countries, get away with not giving documents to...
You take your people back, end of that. But also, again, though, that should be much stricter. It should be, right, as of Monday, Yeah, none of your flights are arriving here. None of your nationals get to come to this country. I don't care whether you're the president or not. That's it. We're done. You start taking your people back. That's the sort of act. That's Trump. That's the Trump-style visa ban, isn't it? That's what works.
Yeah, and so we need to remember what the distinction is now between what Labour are saying and what the other parties have been saying. Reform have always been saying, Conservatives saying more recently, is we're not going to admit you into our asylum system at all.
Yeah.
If you come from a safe third country like France, there is already provision in the immigration laws to do that. We're doing that now, in fact, with the one-to-one scheme. The Tories want to do it with Rwanda. So we could exclude everybody from the asylum system, for coming on small boat from the asylum system using that. And then the other thing, which you rightly mentioned, is the human rights stuff, which wasn't actually excluded by the Illegal Migration Act, and that scuppered the Tory plan, really. Yeah. You've really got to do something about the Human Rights Act and demur from the European Convention on Human Rights to prevent that. Because when you're working in the border force, this is an illegal entrant, you can detain them, you can remove them, but asylum, modern slavery, or applications for human rights will trump you.
Yeah, every time.
You no longer have that capacity to remove, Julia. You lose that capacity to detain. So we've decimated our detention estate. Hardly anybody gets detained when they come off a small boat. And, whether you get a 30-month visa or, whatever it was, or before 5-year, I don't think that's going to put them off, really, in Canada.
Well, they don't care. And again, the reality is, it doesn't matter what you say. If no one actually ends up leaving, and again, we're going to detain you next week because we're going to remove you, they just disappear into the ether, don't they?
Yes, I'm afraid so. So, I mean, I think there are aspects of this, Julia, that I want to throw it out completely. There are certain aspects which the Danes have shown has reduced asylum intake, but Denmark's a different kettle of fish. They're still in the EU. They're in the border of the Schengen zone. They haven't deported thousands and thousands of people. They've just shifted across to Sweden or Germany because there's a more generous system there than there is in Denmark.
But there is that argument that one of the reasons they come here from France, though it's a perfectly safe country, I spent half my life trying to get to France, is that actually they get much more here, and even if you're living in a pretty cruddy, 2-star hotel somewhere, you've got a better life than living in a tent, in northern France. And that's we just have to be inhospitable. But our lefties here, no, we need to roll out the red carpet. Let's go back to the Human Rights Act though, because Article 8, the right to privacy and a family life, these are the crucial aspects. These are being used. My son doesn't. I've sexually abused people. I've sexually abused kids. But I've got a right to family life with my kids. I'm not even allowed to see without somebody actually, to make sure my kids are safe. That's actually a case of being allowed to stay here. My son doesn't like chicken McNuggets in Albania, right to stay here. I mean, abject nonsense. We're talking about foreign criminals. The case the other day, foreign criminal convicted, supposed to be leaving. He's managed to get someone, knock a woman up. Let's be honest, to get pregnant, how useful, and now he's got a right to a family life with the baby that's even unborn. I mean, we're talking madness. But I want to, just for the benefit, I read this out 2 hours ago, but for the benefit of people, because we always hear so much about Article 8, right to family life. 2 paragraphs. 1, everyone has the right to respect for his private and family life, his home and his correspondence. Lovely, great. This appears to be all that the human rights lawyers and the judges have ever read. They've never bothered looking like, because, there's 2 paragraphs, they've only read the 1. The second paragraph says there should be no interference by a public authority with the exercise of this right. Lovely. Except, it goes on to say, except such as is in accordance with the law and is necessary in a democratic society in the interests of national security, public safety or the economic well-being of the country, for the prevention of disorder or crime, for the protection of health or morals, and for the protection of the rights and freedoms of others. That is actually in the article. How on earth are a bunch of human rights lunatics working as lawyers and as judges in our tribunals and our courts, how have they managed to interpret the right of foreign criminals entered the country illegally, committed heinous crimes including rape, to have a right to stay here under Article 8, when that second paragraph states quite clearly that they don't?
Yeah, you're right, Julia. I'm glad you looked that up. There are provisions in the convention which would enable us to disallow or disapply Article 8. But the difficulty we've got is a lot of these, these rules that we now have are what we call, established by judicial overreach. In other words, the judicial system relies very much on precedent.
Yeah.
A lot of the precedents come from the European Court. in Strasbourg, and those are passed down and given due reference when there was a hearing at an immigration.
So one judge in the European Court, and often these people have never worked as judges in their own countries, haven't they? They're really not the most highly. These are not like the top legal brains of the world. They then put out a really weird ruling, and we'd all go, "That's crazy." That sets a legal precedent, so someone else can say, "Oh well, that legal precedent, therefore I've got a right to stay."
Yeah, so you've got to unpick that. You've got to unpick that by your own national legislation. You need to pass a law in Parliament here, which very clearly sets out what our position is with regard to interpretation of that convention. That's the democratic way of doing things. But we haven't done that yet. I don't know what she's going to do. She said she's going to do something with Article 8 and Article 3, but that will mean a fairly fundamental change in our application of human rights legislation in this country. And I think that's where the Labour Party may struggle, Julia, because there are a number of MPs to the left of their party. Even Shabana Mahmood a few years ago was advocating an amnesty for illegal entrance. I mean, it's going to really put the cat amongst the pigeons in their parliamentary party. And we know from the Tories, when they tried to change things, 2 or 3 years went by before they were able to change anything. So I'm not sure there's going to be any instant impact of any of these policies right now. And they do need a fundamental change in the legislation. And I'm not sure they're going to be able to do that.
No, exactly. Even if they wanted to. And again, we've got question marks about whether they really want to. What do you make about some of the measures? Because we're told all weekend, lots of talk about how, Denmark have been pushing, they've been very successful. As you say, they've actually kind of pushed them back to other EU countries. But Denmark is a different situation. For a start, they've gone a lot tougher on issues like ghettos, where they say, more than 50% of people from non-Western countries are in an area they can move people out, or even quite pointlessly, I would say, demolish the apartment buildings, like just move people out, for goodness sake. But also the idea that you can basically take the valuables, confiscate the valuables or money of people, saying, well, we're not paying for your accommodation if you've actually got the money, but not family heirlooms. Of course, anyone with any jewellery or money is going to say, oh, it's a family heirloom. And then, and even then in Denmark, it's barely happened to more than a handful of people. There's a lot of stuff and lots of governments talk about. They talk the talk. It all sounds good and you think it will work, but it's either not enacted or, for instance, like the Danish language test. So if you want to bring your spouse, they have to be over 24 and they have to speak fluent Danish, same as you. But that might work in Denmark because not many people around the world speak Danish. Well, most of the world speak English as a second language now, so that's not going to work for us, is it?
No, so we're not cutting and pasting the entire Danish model into the British model, Julia. They're cherry picking what they want to put down. I think the main two things are you won't get settlement after 5 years and family reunification. That's going to be tricky for you unless you're making a real contribution. But some of the things you're describing, like the seizure of assets, which I've always advocated we ought to do. I think if we get asylum seekers come over here and then we spend all the amount of money in the Home Office and the justice system and the welfare system, then that should be a charge against them. And it's with kids that go to university, really. They should have to pay that back over a lifetime. Well, I think that's too radical for this government.
Caller suggested that earlier, and I was thinking, but they're never going to do it. There's no point sending them the bill. They're never going to pay it. It's just a load of admin, and we pay for the yet another quango.
So we're not going to do that. And I think in terms of the seizure of assets, I've never known any. I went out on the boats a few times. I've never seen anyone turning up dripping with jewellery. So I'm not sure there is a lot of assets to be had.
It's just talk, isn't it? When you mentioned the 5-year to 20-year thing, so this side, after 5 years, you can get permanent settlement here. Again, I think a lot of people find it extraordinary. It's such a short period of time for people. I mean, a lot of people come here on like 3 or 4 year courses, do PhD. Oh yeah, no, just stay here. Why don't you? But moving it up to 20 years. Lot of talk. I mean, I'm listening to BBC this morning from a Sins just to rile me up before the show, and Radio 4. It was sort of, you're talking about people not being able to settle here, put down roots, because at any point they could be sent home. Now, it occurred to me that the key word there was home, as in they would be sent home. Like Ukrainian refugees are here on the basis that that's a particular specific legal position, that when the Ukraine war is over, they go home to Ukraine. Do you think that's an unreasonable requirement?
Well, we get asylum seekers who get status here who go home on holiday. And then we find them at the border and we let them back in again. Even so, I mean, the question is, are they really in serious danger of going back to their own country? Yeah. Once they've established a well-founded fear of persecution in the eyes of the UK courts and the UK law, then that will stick with them. What about Syria? I mean, Assad's gone now. got loads of Syrians here. Why have they not gone back? My worry about this, Julie, although it talks tough, it's actually going to just be an annual 30-month renewal, roll in, roll on, roll on, unless there's some really serious damage caused by the individual concerned. And that actually we're just going to spend a lot more money on granting cases onward and onward and onward until the 20-year period. And I suspect there'll be legal challenges along the road towards that 20-year period, which will actually cause us to reverse some of those policies anyway. So I haven't got a lot of faith in it, I'm afraid.
I think that's I've summed up with that sound, haven't I? I mean, the British public are just, I mean, we're tearing our hair out now. I mean, it's painful. Just tell us briefly, I know I've made you do this many times before, what should they do if they want to get to grips with this?
Start building detention centres now, not accommodation centres, immigration detention centres, treble the size of the immigration detention estate. Change the law so you cannot claim asylum or human rights or modern slavery if you've come from a safe third country like France, and get tough with countries that do not take their people back. Detain and deport. That's what most people want, Julia, but I'm afraid we've got a long, long way from that at the moment.
Absolutely. Tony Smith, put him in charge, for the love of God. Former head of the UK Border Force, always great to talk to him.